Hi there. Today I want to show you a technique in Pro Tools to replace or layer acoustic drums with acoustic drum samples from a virtual instrument library. I'm going to be using a function in Pro Tools called copy audio as MIDI. My plan is to take the snare top and layer it with a sample from a Kontakt library because I want to add a little bit more consistency and a little bit more punch to the lower end of the snare drum. So before we get started, my name's Ian. I'm a singer-songwriter and producer based in British Columbia. If you have a project that you need some help with the audio or the composition side of things, make sure to shoot me an email and I'll see how I can help you out. Let's dive right in here. We're going to take the snare top. We're going to copy audio as MIDI. We're going to use Melodyne on the conversion type percussive. We're going to create an instrument track and call this snare sample. And now we're going to paste that audio as MIDI onto this track. And I just did that by pressing semicolon to move that selection down onto the next track. Then I pressed V and that's it. Now you might notice that it kind of just looks like one big note, and that's actually not the case. If we go to our MIDI editor, you can see that there's lots and lots of notes here. All those notes kind of just mushed together onto that display. But here we actually have every single little bleep of audio captured and turned into a MIDI note. Good news is we can actually change the sensitivity of the selection just manually by taking our grabber tool here and dragging from the very bottom all across and seeing how many notes we can capture before we actually get to what actually looks like our backbeat. So I'm gonna guess that about here should be a pretty safe selection. I don't want to take away any of the actual snare drum hits, so you notice that I am being quite safe here because it's quite difficult to add these back in comparison to how it is to delete them, but I will show you how to do it. Some hits, especially if you are actually trying to preserve the ghost notes, might actually be quite low, and they might actually be about the same level as like bleed from a kick drum, for example. Let's just delete all of this stuff. The actual snare backbeat should be significantly louder than everything else, so it's not going to be too hard. What we're going to do here to make sure that every single one of these MIDI notes actually corresponds to a snare drum hit that we want to sample replace, we're going to zoom into the snare top mic and the snare sample track, and we're going to solo the snare top, and we're going to listen to the whole track. As you do that, if you change your snare sample display to notes, you can actually delete the misfires as you go. If you select your pencil tool and you hold Option, now every time you hover over a MIDI note, you can click it and delete it just like that. It's quite easy. So let's say you're listening to it, and let's pretend for a second that this MIDI note here is a kick drum. You just click there to delete it. Now let's say that you accidentally went too high with your selection of velocity and you actually took away a few of the backbeats that you need. So you're going to select another MIDI note, you're going to copy that, and then with the selector tool you're going to make a selection just before your actual note, and then you're going to press tab, and as long as you have tab to transient over here activated, you should be able to eventually, by clicking tab several times, you're eventually going to have a selection that is perfectly on the beginning of that transient, and then you should be able to press semicolon to transfer that selection down one track as long as you have key focus enabled, this AZ button over here. By pressing V, it's going to paste a note right on that selection. So next up, I'm actually going to level out the dynamics of all of these different MIDI notes. And the way you're going to do that is you're going to select them all and you're going to go to Event Operations, Change Velocity. You're going to use Scale By, and this is actually going to decrease the dynamic range between the velocities. So let's go 56. And when we apply this, everything's going to get quieter, but it's also going to get a little bit more even. So when we add back, let's say 32 velocity points, now everything's back to the level that it was before, but it's a little bit more even in dynamics. So let me hit Command Z a couple of times so you can see the difference between before you do this and after you do this. So this is how dynamic it was before, and this is how dynamic it is now. Way more even. And you can push this as far as you want. If you want to scale by a lesser number, this is going to give you less dynamics. And then you're just going to have to add a little bit more than what I just added here. So next up, you're going to actually assign a drum sample to these MIDI notes. I'm going to use Kontakt, And because I've already done this, I know what drum sound I want, but essentially you're going to pick a snare drum that sounds like what's missing from your snare drum. I felt like my snare drum could use a little bit more bottom end and a little bit more punch. So this snare B from Abbey Road Modern Drummer, I like it quite a bit. The note that I actually want to trigger is D1. So I'm just going to quickly change that over here. If I look at my MIDI editor, all of these notes were triggered on A3, which is not the notes that we want. I'm just going to change this to D4. Then by pressing shift and down arrow, I can actually transpose it by an octave. If you don't want to transpose it by a full octave, you can just press up and down arrows and that goes by one semitone. But anyway, just make sure that's on D1. Some sample libraries you can actually get a rim shot from E1, but rim shots don't have as much bottom end, so I'm actually just going to go with a center hit. Mind you, I'm not listening here just because I've already done this and I just want to show you the process. I'm just going to commit this. So you just right click, commit, and then it's going to render it to audio. We're going to phase align the snare top with the snare sample. I'm going to zoom into the audio a little bit more. If you're looking very closely, you should be able to notice that the very first crest on the audio wave of the snare top is actually going up, and on the snare sample it's going down. So we want to invert that. We're going to use the invert plugin from Audio Suite. It just does one thing, so you can just render it. And then now we're going to nudge this back a few milliseconds. If you're on slip mode, you can use the grabber tool just to refine that a little bit. So now we should have a snare sample that blends in quite well with our snare top. And this is what the snare top will sound like without the sample, and then with the sample added back in. And then later I'm going to solo all of the drums and add the snare sample in.
So here I stand with my heart in my hand. I'm an open book that can't be read without some shades. And I'm losing sleep, 'cause I'm trying to keep my head up high. I don't want a lot better right now, 'cause I wanna be awake for this.
Thank you for watching this. Hopefully it's been helpful. This song is called Losing Sleep, and it's a song that I'm going to be releasing in May. And my good friend Troy Giroux played drums on this. Go check him out on Instagram. He's an amazing drummer in Vancouver. Anyway, see ya. Have a good day.